Hello to all. Welcome to Books and Us, the podcast about learning about new ideas and getting inspiration from books. I'm Ranjit Monga, and as you know, every week I take up books in the non-fiction category, from which we can get a wealth of knowledge and information. The interviews conducted on this podcast are also available on the news website www.globalbihari.com. So if you want to read about them, just go to the website and search under my name or the column, which is called Literary Speaking.
A young person or a person of any age really should put in the thought that is required to have a fulfilling life in terms of reaching one's potential. India really needs more, or your community really needs more of leaders, more of people who can bring about change. And not about just change, but who are like solid people, who are like bedrock to the society that they come from and stand for something. We cannot simply have like herds of sheep just following.
Welcome to episode 12 of the podcast Books and Us. This is the last episode of season 1, and I am thrilled at the way the podcast has turned out. I will be continuing in the same manner in season 2, which will be out shortly. Today we have with us a young guest, Manthan Shah, the author of the extremely interesting book called Unstoppable: How Youth Icons Achieve Extraordinary Things. Yes, the book is about the youth of the country, the times that we all live in, what they should be doing to live their potential, how to achieve their dreams, and what success actually means. He analyzes these questions and answers them with examples, more analysis, and scientific explanations, and adds his unique perspective. So, Manthan, welcome to this podcast, Books and Us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's truly an honor to be on your show.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, Manthan is himself a youth icon, having achieved a lot at a young age. At 21, he was one of the youngest authors to be commissioned by Penguin to write this book. He has been a top sportsman, being the under 18 national champion in table tennis and winning many medals for the country in Australia. In June 2023, as a Schwarzman Scholar, he spent a year studying India-China relations at Tsinghua University in Beijing. Before that, as an undergraduate, he won all the awards that his university had to offer. President's Award, 4 times Dean's List and Global Citizenship Award at the SP Jain School of Global Management, Sydney. He has also been a podcaster, hosting the Planet Impact show, in which he interviewed young change makers. Okay, Manthan, to start off, I would like to hear directly from you, what is the book about?
Well, Mr. Ranjit, again, thank you so much for having me. It's truly a pleasure to be on your show, and thank you so much for this very decorated introduction. I don't like in the day-to-day life. I'm not sure if I've achieved this much, but truly, like 3 years ago, when I was writing this book on my mother's sewing machine in this town called Kedgaon in Ahmednagar, Maharashtra, I
Mm-hmm.
would have never imagined that, in such a short time, not only this book would have been published with Penguin Random House and like had been read by thousands of readers around India, but also being celebrated with a few people. Like the I would get so many emails and handwritten letters
Mm-hmm.
appreciating parts of the book that sort of helped people in very difficult circumstances during the COVID years or after the COVID years. That was one of the most fulfilling experiences, memories that I would always cherish. To understand why I wrote this book, I'll have to share a bit of my own origin story. Um, so, when I was about 6 years old, I was fascinated by this game of table tennis.
Mm-hmm.
And I quickly became the town's under 10 and under 12 champion in Ahmednagar. And when I was like 10 years old, I came back from the school. I was in what, second or third grade, fourth grade, like primary. And I was like, Dad, look, I really am passionate about table tennis and I want to maybe play at the national level one day. And there's this city called Pune nearby. Of course, he knew what Pune was, but I had only heard for the first few times because we had limited exposure to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, there is right facilities there. There's like a stadium. There's like coaches where I could play. Could you please go there for a summer program? So he was like, sure. So immediately, like literally the next day, we went for like a 7-day training program to Pune, and those 7 days turned into 7 weeks, which turned into 7 months, which turned into 10 years that I lived in Pune only to achieve this sort of dream of becoming a national athlete. And for those 10 years, my family took enormous sacrifices. Like I was homeschooled for a number of those years. I would spend, religiously, I would practice 7 hours a day, 7 days a week to to become the best in that sport. And by 2015, I became twice under 17 a national champion uh, in in um, in the School Games Federation of India, and like we won medals for India in Adelaide in Australia in 2015 at the Pacific School Games at international sort of tournaments. I like to my young mind, I was like, this is the ultimate way of making an impact or like being of service to the country. But when I flew back at the airport, like, there was only like my parents there just to receive me, and sort of the things didn't really change. So like I at 15, I had realization that it does not really make the most impact to community at large. It like changed my lifestyle, or like it was a great achievement as a personal achievement, but it wasn't at the level of impact that I wanted to create. And also like when I was 15 to 17 years old, like the training became very like once you're at the international level and to go to the Olympic level, although for people it's like a small distance, but for us it is the biggest amount of difference. Like
Mm.
you have to train in like in Germany or like abroad. It requires a lot of financing, a lot of funding, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of support, which like our middle class family just did not have. And like it is sort of a commitment to this athletic career, which I could not make at that point. Like it was not secure enough for a future to have. And
Mm.
so at that point, I had decided to leave sports. It was a very painful situation for me. And I had a lot of fire I want to achieve something at the level of the Olympics participation or like winning medals internationally, but in a different field. I wanted to compensate my Olympic dream for something else. I took a gap year. I was like traveling around India. I was volunteering at non-profits. I started my own non-profit organization. I was working, reading a lot, and then I found myself in Sri Lanka for a 6 week internship, like volunteering program. And like at that point, really all of these things came together. I was visiting a lot of bookstores. I was trying to align my thoughts. And like in these bookstores, I couldn't find any book that aimed at young people and that talked about coming of age in a developing economy like India, in which we have our own peculiar economic, socio-political challenges,
Mhm.
mental health issues, explored identity of how does one reach one's potential. So I thought maybe you know what, like these books don't make sense to me. They are either
Mm.
written by Western authors, sort of with examples of people from the United States or
Yes,
in
yes.
Europe, or
Mm.
that I could not relate to at all. Like these stories did not speak to me, and these were stories of like much older people
Mm.
written very differently. I wanted to read something of substance, something of I could relate to, like young people's stories.
Mm.
And also, I did not want to write like like preach anything to anyone. At that point, I was what, 20 years old. Not like I don't think I have enough years of experience in terms of the numbers of years I've left to teach anyone anything.
Mm.
All I'm going to do was write a sort of share my notes about what does it mean to become a young overachiever in India, for based on my interviews and my stories and my analysis and sort of research that I've done. So it was just a storybook, a buffet of stories for young
Mm.
individuals, sharing not only just the highs but also the lows,
Mm.
like the real stories of young individuals and
Mm.
of what it means to live their lives. And that's what I tried to achieve. And that's how this book was sort of coming into picture.
Even I found the book very interesting and the stories of all of these youngsters very inspiring.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Mm.
Like, I wanted to write a book which was the book that my 17-year-old self or any normal middle class 17-year-old self person individual would like if they aspire to sort of explore what their potential is and sort of reach their potential. So this book is about in this book I especially cover like five key elements. So
Mm.
first, it's about the stories of 40 young overachievers, and like it draws inspiration from um, stories of people like Olympians like Duty Chand and Deepa Karmarkar, or like rapper like Kambhari, or astrophysicists such as Dr. Karan Jani, or acid attack survivors such as Reshma Qureshi, or even young Indian scientists who sent satellites in space like Sanket Deshpande. So the first and the core tenet of this book is just stories of young people who are at the average age of 25 at the right time of writing that book,
Mm.
and just like reading their stories. I don't tell you what exactly you should learn. It's just you read what you like
Mm.
and see what inspires you. Second is also stories of like sort of a little bit older, more experienced mentors, like industry leading neuroscientists or prominent authors, or heads of states or big leaders who
Mm.
look back at their life and they say, "Ki, what could have they done differently?" Third, it is based on a lot of data and research. So I read over 200 books, research papers, journal articles. I surveyed 300 individuals. I just like traveled and spoke to several number of people. So it's like a lot of data points that I have covered goes there.
Mm.
Fourth is a lot of call to action, small activities, guides of what you can do, like small things that could nudge you to achieving those traits. And lastly, it is embedded, rooted in my own personal story. So it's
Mm.
about the little laps, the silly things that I've done, wobbling around in India and Singapore and Spain, just
Mm.
having a conversation. And that is what the book about according to me.
And you neatly divided the book into the various qualities you feel that if the youngsters or anybody for that matter adopt, they can have a more satisfying and fulfilling life. And you start off with the quality of grit and perseverance, which you've put forward as necessary for success, and also that you have to ward off social pressure to achieve what you want. So you have sort of given an example of Ainem Hashim, who achieved success as a stunt rider. So how did that happen for her, and how can one adopt grit, in their lives?
Thanks for taking out Anam's story. Like, she is definitely one of the most inspiring people I've met, and she happens to be the first interview I've done. Like, Anam's story is very particularly inspiring because she grew up in a patriarchal family. She really fought her way to heights in the field of stunt riding and just like motorsports, uh, which is historically deemed as a man's industry.
Yeah, and there are
And
not many
she
people, doing that, even men.
exactly. And she got there by not following the path of others, or like
Mm.
seeing where the world is, what is expected of her from the society, but really creating her own path.
Mm.
And I wanted to see if this success was unique to her or was part of a larger trend. And like at the end of the book, as you will also find out, it really showed me a unique way of finding success and happiness and fulfillment, as you said.
Mm.
So, firstly, like the Anam story goes like this: like she was born in Kanpur in India. Her like she grew up in very abusive sort of circumstances. Her mother had to be remarried into a family which was not necessarily the most conducive or like emotionally supportive. So at 17, she ran away from her house in Kanpur to Pune to live with her aunt. She loved riding bikes. So
Mm.
she taught herself like stunt riding on the side, and then she dropped out of college. She focused on riding bikes, and she soon worked her way to become the best motorcyclist in the country. She is now the face of stunt riding in India, and she was the first woman to ride the Khardungla Pass on the world's highest motorable road on a 100cc scooty,
Mm.
and during that ride, she also won her place in the India Book of Records. And this story is interesting because to me, either you are a conformist, in which like when I was growing up, like there was a very conformist path towards success. Like what was expected of me was, or like what is expected of any young person is,
Yes.
school, study hard, get good grades in your 10th, 12th exams, study for IIT, JEE, and other exams, and get into the best engineering schools, medical schools, or law schools, and then you work hard, you get a great job, like high-paying job, a stable job, get married, have a family, settle down, and if at all, maybe aspire to go outside of India and sort of lead a very comfortable life. And that is conformist path towards success. But that is firstly not a reality for most of Indians, nor do most of the young people that I sort of surveyed for this book
Mm,
aspire to have this very specific path.
mm,
And that is one thing. And the another thing is if you oscillate on the other end of the spectrum, it's
mm,
very non-conformist. Like she found her own path in an industry which is man's industry, which is not a lot of people do this, and she became the best in that.
mm,
But for a lot of us, reality is somewhere in the middle. It is not being completely conformist or completely non-conformist. It's like somewhere in the between, finding your own path towards success, towards life, and achieving great things. And what would it means like is in my own story. Like first, I was a bit non-conformist. Like I played sports and pursued that, being homeschooled, and my parents also supported that. It was a bit non-conformist, but at some point I had to conform. I had to
yeah.
leave sports and study and get back to college and find a way, sort of cover the gap that, like, because I was not educated in the normal sense of the terms, I
Mm,
had to cover a lot of distance that others have already covered and
mm,
find my own place in the world. So I have sort of seen both these sides of the spectrum, and this book is sort of speaks to the people who want to also do something which is conformist or non-conformist. So, like in this book, I spoke to 40 overachievers and found the common patterns in them. And the first pattern that I found was like everyone had this unbelievable amount of grit and tenacity and like perseverance to keep doing things that they do. And
mm.
sort of, I'll dive deeper into what grit really means. And one of the other examples who personify grit in the later questions.
Yeah, Manthan. So, though your book targets young people, but while reading the book, I couldn't, resist looking at your goal setting exercise closely. And then actually, I also picked up a diary and a pen, and then started setting my goals also. And I feel that that exercise can help a lot of people, whether they are young or whether they are older. So, can you explain how that is to be done?
I'm so glad that you found it useful too. One of the most important parts of people who have achieved success at a young age or at any age were like they had a very crystal clear goal
Mm,
and the vision that they could visualize and they could see, and then
mm,
they could plan how to get there. So this exercise is based on three levels of goals: top level goals, medium level goals, and sort of the lower level goals, the bottom level goals. So for the top level goals, it's most like a north star of where you're headed. And
mm,
to see your future North Star, a good starting point is to see your past
mm,
achievements. So, for example, a common thread that I found in my life was a passion to find something for the country, like to like reach my potential in a way which helps India. Like
mm,
winning, first it was winning medals for the country. Second is writing the book for the country. Third is so like what could the next thing? So I knew it was something to do with sort of the broader framework of the community that we come from.
mm,
So then I found like okay, so the vision. So India has this goal of reaching a ambitious net zero economy by the year 2070. It
mm,
means that we need to cut our carbon emissions to an amount which can be absorbed or durably stored by nature or other sort of remove carbon removal measures, and leaving our like sort of environment net zero carbon emissions and the atmosphere. So this is my north star decided, and then to reach that north goal, we have to divide it into smaller clusters of supportive goals that enable you to reach that goal. So
mm,
for my goal in particular, it was like three ways to reach there. Like one is public policy, second is accelerating breakthrough technologies adoption in India. So technology, and third is increasing the access to low cost finance for infrastructure development. So there's like policy, technology, finance are the three ways of reaching there. Then I expose myself to various internships, research papers, people in my podcast, and like various ways in which I could explore these three goals. And that's why I did my master's degree. I did several of my internships. And then there's like smaller goals to help me reach those medium-term goals, like to get those internships, to get those research papers. I would engage in activities, like for my podcast, I would invite people whom I would like to work for, and then work for them and like understand what it means to write public policy for India's climate vision, and then sort of reach that national goal, long-term goal. So this is one of the frameworks that I've used in my book. There are like several exercises like these that could help someone at various stages of their lives.
So, besides goal setting and being able to visualize that goal, what are the other qualities you feel young people or people may adopt for achieving extraordinary things?
Yeah, no, so that's a good question, and the whole book of is premised on these qualities. So there are like I think there are the 10 were the
Yes.
chapters in my book, like grit and uh, consistency, growth mindset, giving back, several of these. But I think reflecting on my own life, it's of course hard to pick out favorites. There's no favorites, they're all important. But to me, I think the ability to network and build social capital and reach out to people and connect with people, that was helpful for me to get things done fairly quickly and at a very young age. So like publishing this book was hard. Like generally publishing industry is a very difficult industry to crack, especially for someone like me. I was writing a book 3 years ago in a small town. I have no connection to the literary world. I didn't know anyone who had published a book who I could ask. So from there to actually getting an offer from Penguin and other publishers and publishing that book required a lot of creative ways of getting to the right people there. Right? And that is also one of the chapters in the book, like networking and how do you do that. So for me, the approach of networking was very indigenous. So like, firstly, what I did was while I was researching the book and I was doing everything that is required to write a book, like on the side, I was running a podcast, a completely independent topic, a completely different thing. And on that on podcast, I would invite guests that I would be most interested in speaking to. So a lot of them were, of course, the people that I would want to work at, like leaders I looked up to, but also authors who had written books what had really been inspiring. And I would do a podcast interview with them. And then at the end of the podcast, I would ask, so what are the things that they were working on, what they were most passionate about, and what are the ways in which I could help? And sometimes they would say, "Oh, I have this nonprofit, or I'm working on this research piece, or I'm looking for a ways to raise capital for this initiative, or something or the other." And then I would try to solve their problems. I would share relevant information. If I knew someone in the field, I would connect them to each other. I would volunteer to their nonprofits. I would write research, do research work for them for free of cost, whatever, and build that sort of a rapport with them. And after that, like after the whole period, I would ask them, by the way, I have this book idea. It's completely like, out of the blue, but would you be keen to just like take a look at this and sort of share how you wrote your book? And more often than not, in fact, 100% success rate was they were more than willing. They spent hours with me talking about my book idea, helping me write the book draft, sort of the proposal draft. And most importantly, they connected me to their editor who knew someone at somewhere, who knew someone who was at Penguin, who knew the publisher of Penguin, who eventually became my publisher. They got on a phone call, and within like I'm not talking about months or weeks. Like within a few hours, they were on a phone call with me saying, "I love your book idea, and
Yeah.
let's talk, let's pitch, let's do this." And that's how things were moving. And so even in my book, there's a chapter, one of the 10 chapters about networking. If you're someone who has to build your own networks and um, achieve something of value, you definitely need people backing you up. And you do it in 5 steps that I spoke in the book. One is you reach out to people, understand what they need in terms of resources, opportunities, information, money, connections. There would be something like this. Second is understand their problems and find a way in which you can sort of help. Make small things, make a referral,
Yes.
just like read an article and send to them. And that's third thing, do 5-minute favors. So like small things. This is Adam Grant's research, but it says small things that take you less than 5 minutes. If you write like an author, you go to their Amazon page and just leave a 5-star review. Like that'll take you less than 5 minutes, but that means so much to the author. Or like just read an article, say, okay, by the way, I thought about your problem that you stated, and maybe this article could help. Or I met someone who might be interesting for you to chat with, and connect them to each other. Or then after you do that, you that keeps your memory fresh in their minds.
Mm,
Fourth is always do what you said. Like if you say that you'll connect them to someone, if you do something for them, follow it through right away, because
mm,
that builds credibility. And lastly, don't ask what they can do for you. Like don't demand things or request things upfront. Like add value to them multiple times, and then in the end ask for a small favor and be like, okay, if you even if you can't do it, it's fine. Like it won't
mm,
change anything,
mm,
and then they would give you even more. If you like sort of are presumptions about they should do this for you, it's not like a transaction. It should be a very nurturing sort of a long-term thing that you're trying to do. And I think that one skill or trait really added a lot of value to me, and that's what something I've heard from a lot of young people. Also, like several people did this for their, getting funded for their project or getting recognized for their work.
Yeah, actually, what you said in the book about this is very interesting because back in our time, forming networks was much, much more smoother, and it wasn't so
Hmm.
what should I say, formalized as it has become now, that you have to make a strategy on how to network and form connections with people. And sometimes we would just ask. And you exhibited that in the story, how you said how you got your first job or your internship at Ashoka in Singapore. You just went there and asked. And actually, back then, that is how we used to do. We used to
Hmm.
just send in applications to people whom we thought that we were a good fit in an organization, or go and meet them or make a call. But now all this is so formalized.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So actually, it is often not as formal. Like when I was writing this book, it was all like retrospectively thinking and putting a framework to it.
Hmm.
But as you said, like a lot of the actions that I did were very intuitive, and
Hmm.
that's how even networking, networking is a bad word of sorts. Like it
Yes.
is a very, it's not as transactionary. It should be
Hmm.
more like a capital building thing exercise, right? So
Hmm.
in this situation, it should flow very naturally, but maybe
Yes.
having some framework on how it goes could help.
Yes.
But otherwise, people should just go for what they think is right.
Yeah. And the story about Pratishtha Deveshwar, you shared in
Mm.
the book, she had got paralyzed and still went on to transform her life. That is something very interesting. And there are a lot of lessons to be learned from her life.
Absolutely. Like one thing I appreciate about this book writing journey was it enabled me to chat with inspiring people like Pratishtha and still found a strong bond. Like we're still in touch and we've become like she's one of my closest friends now and closest confidants. So I'm so happy that you found her story also very inspiring. As I was mentioning earlier, grit and more details about grit. So I think grit is made up of the following things, like having sort of a long-term goal, and then having interest in what you do,
Mm,
practicing to become really good at what you do, and finding a sort of sense of purpose in the things that you're doing.
mm,
And when you're doing all these three things, that is, you have to, that sort of builds grit. But underlying all these things is hope. Like at every stage, you should be hopeful that things are going to work out, something's going to work out. And I think Pratishtha is a beacon of hope for me. To share her story, so Pratishtha is now like the first wheelchair user from India to study at the University of Oxford. She is the recipient of the prestigious Diana Award, one of the most prestigious accolades like young people under the age of 25 can receive for social work. She is the ambassador of Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao Abhiyan, a TEDx speaker, and she's like regularly speaks at this big United Nations conferences and everywhere. But um, even after studying so much, she instead of taking a high paying consulting job elsewhere, she came back to India, sacrificed a lot, and she's studying hard for these examinations that will position her in a at the levels of influence in which she can create true lasting change. And that is something we truly respect about her.
mm,
So her story starts with this. Like imagine yourself being a very happy, outgoing child, and one evening when you're like about 13, you have a serious accident, leaving half your body under like paralyzed, and we have to spend 5 years completely bedridden. So this was her story, and she like these 5 years bedridden in her times of adversity when all her doctors, physiotherapists, everyone said like failed to give her a ray of hope that she could walk again, she could live a fulfilling life again. If she couldn't find it outside, she found it inside her. Like she told me she found solace in prayers, meditation, journaling. She would write to God saying that like although you have deprived me of social life of a teen, like she would detail out dreams and aspirations that she'd want to do if she could get her old self back, and sort of that level of hope kept her going, and things worked out. And she told me a quote that has always stayed with me. She says, "Thoughts are things. If you can dream it, you can be it. All it takes is hard work, grit, courage, and hope."
So, in all your outings and meeting thousands of youngsters and listening to this story, I mean, you have met successful ones. You have also met the ones who just wanted a successful life and didn't want to be like high achievers. So, what do you think that how do you distinguish between the two? And are you saying in your book that everybody can be an achiever?
There are two parts to this. So
Mhm.
one thing is from where I come from, like in when I was like 16, 17, 18, I saw this very high competition in India, just to sort of keep going on this rat race in terms of education, employment, etc. And in general, this situation back then to me, as growing up, looked like not the most healthy and happy dynamics for a young person to grow in terms of, like 46% of the Indian graduates, at least back then, were employable. The others were not employable despite the education. And, like the number of people who have the education degree is such a small percentage of the entire population. Um, in generally, like the per capita income, the mental health, the suicide rates, the happiness index, how happy the young people are, all of it looked gloomy. And for me at that point, I felt like one cannot rely on the existing conformist systems, and you cannot just go on life doing what is expected of you and thinking ki in return you will be happy. I don't think that it works that way. To break free from these chains, one has to do something which is very unique to yourself, to very unique to what makes you happy, define your own success, what it means to you,
Uh-huh.
and achieve it on your own terms. And you have to take more agency to become sort of extraordinary, but not in the traditional sense of becoming wealthy or becoming extraordinarily famous or whatever. It could be whatever you think is success for you, and you achieving sort of level of potential, your own highest potential to achieve that. This book kind of offers you stories and resources and guide to helping you in towards that direction. But for me, the part one is it is of paramount importance for you to break free from these chains and take agency of your own life. That is one. But part two of the story is, as you rightly pointed out, I surveyed 300 plus young people in colleges and high schools in and around India, like towns in India, tier two, tier three cities, tier one cities, all like geographically around India. And one of the questions I would ask them is, what is success for you? And
Mhm.
the rest of the questions would be, what are your obstacles to success, etc., that I've mentioned more in the book. But to that question, for most people, like it was success meant more so about like having a happy, healthy,
Mhm.
fulfilling life, and having a healthy family life. And that is a perfectly great definition of sort of
Mhm.
aspiration that a young person can have. But even to have happy and healthy and sort of financially independent ways towards providing to your family, you need to do something, um, take more control of yourself, and even to achieve whatever your definition of success is, there are resources that can help you do it much more faster. Sort of the 10 trades that I found in my book, and of course, they're not exhaustive, but this is what I found were most important or most common among the young poor people.
So the basic thing is that to you follow your heart, whether you want to be just happy or whether you want to be a highly, a high achieving individual.
It cannot be a like just follow your heart intuitively at a broad level. Starts is a very good starting place to have your deciding a north star or deciding
Mm.
where you're headed. But you cannot leave it at that. Like it's a good starting point, but I think a young person or a person of any age really should put in the thought that is required to have a fulfilling life in terms of reaching your one's potential. Like, it's not an obligation to anyone, but I think like India really needs more, or your community really needs more of leaders, more of people who can bring about change. And not about just change, but who are like solid people who are like bedrock to the society that they come from and they stand for something. We cannot simply have like herds of sheep just following things. Like it's enough. Like I've had the fortune to live and study in Singapore and Australia and the Middle East and China and like in Europe. And after seeing all of this, I truly feel that we are 1.4 billion people, but the youth of the India at this point really have a responsibility to themselves and their communities to be more than just a happy-go-lucky person. I really think they should take the agency and be the change that they want to see, as Gandhi said. But truly, it's like really time to act. Like one cannot be on the back seat.
In fact, I found many motivating lines in your book, which can give an indication of, how to go about it. Like I'm going to read out some of them. Uh,
Mhm. Yeah.
some of these quotes are: take chances, try more, fail more, succeed more. Hard work is more important than talent or your social and educational background, which should be very motivating. Then also 10,000 hours of practice are needed for mastery.
Mhm.
Having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset is more important for achieving your goals or making a success of your life. So, in the end, to wrap up, can you encapsulate some of the necessary points or attributes for achieving extraordinary things?
Yes, of course. In the journey of writing this book, I observed sort of 10 themes that are particular and relevant to us youth. So it's really not about finding your passion. It's about nurturing it by sticking with your goals over a long period of time. Um, it's really not about cribbling about the problems around us. It's about thinking creatively and making things happen and learning from doing.
Mm.
It's not always about just analytical skills and the hard skills that like, we learn. It's a lot about emotional intelligence and the ability to deal with the failure. Um, Lastly, it's not about how much you can take from others. It's really about how much you can give. And like to give you a more example of this, um, like I personally also define my life as like the more I help out, the more successful I become. And so like I measure my success in what I've done for the people around me, and that is my real accolade. Um, so yeah, I think the world would definitely need more givers, more people who are like actively thinking about how they can add value to the other people. And in that way, if you think about it, like the act of giving also turns life more happy, and it also motivates you to work harder, smarter, longer. Because like, wouldn't you agree that you'd like to put in efforts into more demanding projects and set more challenging goals for yourself when you are happy about it? And when you're doing those hard things, the people, the sort of the larger purpose of giving back and makes you happy, and it feels more rewarding when you do things for others and just for yourself. So I think I could leave it at that, but there are about like 10 sort of larger themes that I deal with in the book,
Mm.
and I would love for you and the readers to take a read and share what stuck with you and what moved you and what did not, and just reach out. Like I like to see myself as quite accessible, so please feel free to email me, text me on like Instagram or social media or wherever, and I'm very happy to get in touch. My email address is manthanshahwork@gmail.com, which is my name, Manthan Shah, and work, which is work @gmail.com.
Okay, okay. So, on that note, Manthan, thank you so much for being part of this podcast. It was a pleasure speaking with you and learning all these things about how young people think and, and also getting inspired by your thoughts.
The pleasure was entirely mine, if I could be selfish in this way. This was such a great show. Thank you so much for putting in very thoughtful questions, and very delighted that you could have me on the show.
Thank you. Bye bye. So, listeners, that was a talk with Manthan Shah, the young and dynamic author of the book Unstoppable: How Youth Icons Achieve Extraordinary Things. That also brings the curtain down on season 1 of the podcast Books and Us. We would be returning soon with the second season. Please send me your feedback on what we can add or change in season 2. You can write to me at podcast at raymondproductions.org. That is RAMONPRODUCTIONS.org. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, goodbye and take care.